Okay, so I am hanging out here with Wade Foster, who's the CEO of Zapier. And I am, first of all, just a huge fan of Zapier myself. So Zapier is a tool for connecting different pieces of software together and really automating a process for yourself. And I personally, several years ago, used Zapier to build the first version of my first company. And so I built, grabbed landing pages and Typeform, connected everything with Zapier, and kind of created this invisible app and made my first $35,000 and got into 500 Startups Accelerator with this kind of Zapier connected product that I had tested for version 1. So I am a huge fan of what you guys are doing and what you're building. And so I'm really excited to talk to you because you're a non-technical founder yourself. You're not a developer, right?
Not a very good one.
Got it. Got it. So I think folks will be really interested in your story and all that stuff, but can we start with just how Zapier works, just for folks who don't know?
Sure. Yeah. So the basics of Zapier is it helps you be more productive. It helps you automate all the things that happen between various web apps. So like a simple thing you could do is every time I get an email that has an attachment, I'm going to set up a rule that pushes that attachment into Dropbox so I have all my files backed up. Super basic. But you can also expand that to make a lot more complicated things. Stuff like what Tara did for apps without code and for our first version is you can say things like, hey, when someone fills out this form on my website, I want to run their email through Clearbit to like enrich the data. I want to send them a follow-up email saying, thanks for filling out this thing. I want to also to send myself a Slack message to tell me to follow up with them right away. I want to add them to my MailChimp list. I want to put them into Salesforce. I want to schedule a thing via Calendly. Like you can chain along all this stuff all at once. So this is stuff normally that you would hire an assistant to do, or you would just put up with yourself. And with Zapier, you can just automate the whole thing away.
Yeah. So like today, a lot of this kind of automation stuff is normal and people are talking about it in business. But when you started, that was not necessarily the case. So first of all, when did you start Zapier and how did you even come up with the idea?
Yeah, so we started in 2011. Me and one of my co-founders had been doing a lot of freelance work. And every now and then we get asked to build these things for folks, stuff that Zapier can now, anyone can build. So we had someone say, hey, can you get this? I have a form on my WordPress site. I want to get this stuff pumped into Salesforce. We had another, it was like PayPal sales into QuickBooks. So it's just like pushing this data around and people were hiring us to write, figure out the APIs, write some code and how to do that. And Brian messaged me one day and he's like, I think we can make a tool that allows kind of just your everyday internet user to set this stuff up themselves and not have to go to engineers. And I heard that and I was like, you know what? That is an awesome idea. We should work on that. And so then that's where Zapier started.
So when you were working on it, was the idea to sell it to people or was it just to do it for fun or was it to do it to make your own kind of freelancing work easier? Where were you going with that?
We always kind of had in the back of our minds, let's make this a business. Let's see if we can, turn into a thing that pays for our salaries and we don't have to have like full-time jobs anymore. And it can be a nice business for ourselves. But really at the start, it was like, can we make something fun and cool and useful to people?
Yeah.
And, that we did. We got a few people using it and it was like, oh, this actually does have some legs. We can maybe make a go of that. And the ambitions they keep getting bigger each step. It's like you achieve one thing and you start to think, this could be even more. And that's kind of what pushed us and propelled us along. And even what propels us along today is like you achieve one thing and you're like, wow, that was fun. Can we take it to the next level?
Right.
Let's see what it would take to do that, right?
And you guys have done that, right? You kind of checked off all those things that you just mentioned, creating jobs for yourself, creating huge companies or solid-sized companies. And you guys are at 20 million in annual run rate right now, right?
Yeah. As of May of last year, that's where we're at. Mm-hmm.
How does that feel?
As you can realize, it feels kind of crazy. Our goal was let's make a job that can pay for our salaries, right? And so to go from that to employing over 100 people, it's sometimes a little surreal. I often tell people it feels both like it went really fast, but also that it took forever at the same
Oh,
time.
really? Okay. Why does it feel like it went fast, and why does it feel like it took forever?
So the reason it feels fast is that like I can't even like it it feels like just the other day that it was like we were, you know, hacking in like our apartments and like coffee
Yeah.
shops trying to get this stuff going. And so it feels like that was really quick. But then it also, like, while you're in the middle of it, you're just like, oh my gosh, we're not paying ourselves salaries for like years. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like we could have a job that would be like, I would, you know, not sweating bullets on rent and things like that. And not that they were ever sweating that hard, but
Right.
it's just like life would be a little more easy in the short term to have like a normal salary.
Right. Right. Okay. So that's why it felt slow,
Hmm.
but it also felt like it was really fast because,
Hmm. Yeah, it just feels like just like yesterday. Like
oh,
we
yeah.
like it's like I can remember when it was just the three of us, and now like to not be the one, like the three of us did everything, and there's like so much of the site that like our hands are in, but
Yeah.
now like so much stuff happens without any of the three of us touching it at
Right.
times. And so
Right.
like it's like, wow, that happened in a blur.
Yeah. One of the things that's so interesting to me about your story and your trajectory is that a lot of people would say, if you kind of look at Silicon Valley and tech companies, that your growth has happened slowly, right?
Mm,
Because you guys have been at this for 8 years or so, and you have not done the approach of like, let's raise like tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. You
hmm.
guys did raise some money up front, but have really kind of built this in a way that not all tech companies out there are pursuing. And so
Hmm.
maybe, you know, talk to me about how you think through that in terms of if you think that that's different from how other people are building, and how you approach having money and funding yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think of funding as a tool. It's a means to help you achieve your goals. And so the reason we took the money, we took it about a year in. So we'd been at it for a while. We'd had some good progress. We had a proof of concept. We had customers. We had revenue. Not a
Yeah.
lot of it, but we had the playbook. Like we knew at that point in time, we knew that it was working. It wasn't
So
like,
how far
oh,
in were you when you raised money?
we had, I think, about 6,000 in MRR, but we saw the traffic trajectory was going up week over week.
Yeah.
We had the app flywheel working. So we had people who were building apps on Zapier already, even at
Mm.
that time.
So
And
how much
so
time was that from starting?
it took us
How
about a
many?
year to get to that point.
A year. Okay. So a
Um,
year before you're raising anything.
exactly. And
Okay.
so we could tell like this thing is working, but we also were like, it's still going to be a while before like we can just afford to live like normal lives. So it was
Yeah.
like we could get a small amount of money, give up a small amount of equity, hire 1, 2 people, not a lot, like literally just a couple salaries, and then put most of the money in the bank as cushion just in case something weird happens, right? You just
Yeah.
never know. Some weird thing could go
Yeah.
wrong, and it's nice to have a little extra change. And so that's what we did. And then all along the way, people kept asking us, are you going to raise another round? Are you going to get more money? You know, VCs, I think they have their own set of automation where they're like, you know,
Right.
every 18 months, companies need to come back to the watering hole. So they have like their auto emails set up to ping you and be like, hey, no, I
Come
love what
back.
you're working on. Let's catch up for coffee, right?
Yeah.
And so like about 18 months, 12 to 18 months after we did the seed round, we started getting those emails, and we just kept getting them. And people would be like, why aren't you raising more money? Why aren't you raising more money? It's like, we haven't spent it. Like, what do we need it for? Like, coming back to our initial philosophy on funding is it's a tool to help you achieve goals. And we didn't need that tool for where we were at. And so we just kept building the company. Our growth rate was good. We felt like we were going as fast as we could. And so more funding didn't seem like the answer to any of the problems that we had. The
Mm.
answer to the problems we had was better code or better marketing campaigns or better customer service or something like that.
Yeah. Got it. Which is
Mhm.
totally different than how I think a lot of people manage their money when they go raise. Because you guys raised about $1 million. Is that right?
Yep. Hmm.
Okay. So you raised $1 million. And was that from one investor or multiple investors?
It was a handful. Yeah. You know, a couple just like angel investors, and we had one institutional in there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you raised $1 million, and then do you intentionally set it to the side? Like, we're
Pretty
not
much, yeah.
gonna
Like we put in a bank account. Like I said, we hired one person pretty much right away.
Yeah.
And then like 3 months later, we hired another person. And then like 4 months later, we hired another person. So for a while, like we were dipping into the balance a little bit, but never was it very far. Like I think at its lowest point, we maybe had dipped $100,000 into that full 1.3 million that we'd raised. And that took us like 2 years to dip that far.
Wow.
And then we turned it around, and, in 2014 we were profitable, and we've been profitable ever since then.
So great. Okay. Got it. Would you recommend that other people take that approach, that like set the money aside approach, or spend everything that you've got as fast as you can? Like, how do you?
Oh man, I think it depends on the business, but I would say most businesses would benefit from some like fiscal responsibility by setting the money aside. Treat it almost as if you don't have it, and only use it when you feel like it is that money is the only way you can solve a problem.
Yeah.
I think the constraints on you really enforce creativity in the early days, and too many people see, oh, we have a problem. The way to solve that problem is to hire. And then if that's the way you solve problems, then all you're doing is adding the most expensive way to solve problems, which is headcount. They get a big salary every single month, and you're going to be in a tough spot. Whereas if you look at it like, hey, we have this problem, maybe we could automate some of this stuff, or maybe we could not do it in a certain way and do it this other way that doesn't require a headcount, or maybe we just don't need this thing at all. Maybe this thing that we're talking about is actually not necessary for a business, and we should focus on this thing that we've already got. So I think really just being very critical about the problems you're solving, and are they important, and what is the best way to solve them, is really the thing to pay attention to. And sometimes, yes, hiring people will be the answer to that, but I don't start there. That should be kind of like, well, we've checked a lot of different things, and the only way we think we can solve this is to bring somebody on.
Right. And it's more about scaling something up that's already working.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, got it. So when you first started, though, when you think about kind of the year that it took before you raised money, that first year, pretty much from the beginning, you had paying customers. You mentioned that somebody was like, we want to pay you to create this. It wasn't like you had an idea and had to go find paying customers. You started with paying customers, no?
Kind of. So we had those freelance clients that were paying us, not for Zapier specifically, but for what the eventual outcome of what Zapier would do.
Right.
So we knew that, like, hey, people are going to want this. Plus, integrations are a thing that people have always wanted. Like, we found bunches of forums where people were asking for them and none existed.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, if we build this, like, we didn't worry that people wouldn't like our stuff. It was something else. Like, could we scale up enough integrations to make it matter? Could we deliver at a price point that people cared about? Those were like the problems we faced, not like, are we going to build this thing and nobody's going to care about it? Like, we felt pretty certain that if we built it, some people would find it useful if they knew it existed and could use it.
And that's not because you made that up, because you had been talking to people, you'd been kind of manually puppeting, doing the work. You knew there was demand.
Yeah, and plus you could just see it. Like, I remember going to, like, Highrise had a user forum back in the day, and someone was asking about a Google Contacts integration, and that thread was like a couple years old and like 400 replies deep of people saying, where is this? We want this. Why doesn't this exist? And 37 Signals kind of product development MO is like, just build the fewest things you possibly could. So of course they hadn't built it. They probably were never going to build it. And that was not an uncommon path for integrations. We saw that across many different web apps at the time, where people were asking for integrations and the response from the vendor was, maybe.
Right.
Like,
it's not our focus.
Exactly. And so we felt like, wow, the vendors don't care to build this. Customers really need it. If we can plug into that and do it in a way that reaches a bunch of folks, then maybe that could work. And so we built the initial version, and we tried to find like the earliest customers, and we would counter to what most people would do, we didn't give them like free access to try it out. We said, do you want this? If so, it's $100. You get access to the beta for as long as the beta lasts. The beta could end tomorrow. It could end in 3 months. We're not sure. Like, if you think it matters to you, if this is an important enough problem, then we want to give you access to it. And so that worked really well because the people we ended up talking to were the ones that really cared about the problem. We weren't distracted by a bunch of just like early adopter tire kicker type crowd.
Right. Because you said it's $100.
Yeah, and they're like, I'm not gonna try this thing for $100 if it doesn't actually solve a current known problem.
And so you just said okay, and you just moved on.
Yeah, we said that's fine. We have an email launch list. We added those folks to a launch list. We're like, hey, when we're gonna do a public thing, we'll let you know about it then.
Wow. Okay, got it. Because when you then did your public launch, it wasn't at the $100 price point. It was
yeah. And that's when we did our official launch. We had more. I think not right away, but actually like a few months later, we did add like a free tier. Yeah. But like the first plan that we came out with started at like $10 a month or something. So it was
interesting.
Yeah.
Because people see what you do now and they see the free tier, so they think maybe, you should start with a free tier. But you didn't start with any free tiers.
Not right out the gate, but pretty soon after that, we did add one.
You added one. And then the first round of customers you charged them more, not less. People always think I should charge my first customers less because it's not fully done, fully ready. You charge them more. Wow. Yeah. Okay, really interesting. So, okay, in the first year, you're not the tech guy or the technical guy. So what are you spending your time doing as the non-technical founder?
Yeah, so these forums where people are hanging out, like I'm reading through all these forums, I'm responding to questions, pointing people to our site saying, hey, come check this stuff out. I am trying to build up that launch list. Our launch list got up to 10,000 people before we eventually launched. And I am like teaching myself as much code as possible. Yeah. So I got to where at the height of it, I probably about maybe a dozen or so of the earliest apps on Zapier were integrated by me.
So good.
But it wasn't because I was a great programmer. It was because Brian, our co-founder, had built like this really good model where I could more or less like copy and paste, build apps onto Zapier. And so as long as the API followed the format of other APIs we already had, I could figure it out, right? Like I could be like, okay, this is kind of like this other app. So like I kind of do this here, this there. So I didn't take a lot to call myself an engineer would be a disservice to all the great engineers out there.
Got it. Okay, so did you face any particular uphill battles just as a non-technical founder entrepreneur?
I mean, honestly, the toughest thing is building stuff because like eventually you have to start building things and making that stuff work. And so the reason I met Brian was because I wanted to start learning to build stuff myself. I had ideas and I wanted to get better at this stuff. And Brian was the smartest engineer that I knew. And I said, hey, I want to spend more time with you. And so we started freelancing together and I started learning some stuff from him. And I ended up, the kind of quid pro quo was, I'll play in your band too. So we played in a blues jazz band. They need a saxophone player. So I went and played in their band. And so that was kind of like the trade that we set up. Yeah. Okay. It sounds more transactional than it really was in real life. It was more like, yeah, this sounds great. This sounds cool. We'll both do it. Right.
Oh man. I love it. Are you still playing saxophone?
Not as much as I was when we started. Yeah, but I wish we still had a group together that was playing more frequently. Man. Anyway, so I really did try and learn as much as I could. And I think that does two things for you as a non-technical founder. One, you understand what's required when technical stuff comes around, and maybe perhaps you can even build some stuff. But if not, you still are at a level of competency that when you need a co-founder, when you need a technical co-founder, they're going to respect you and say like, look, this person gets it. They understand what needs to go into this. You're not being ridiculous around things like timelines or feature requests or what goes into building a product, because you've actually done a little bit of work to understand what goes on behind the scenes.
Right.
And that's ultimately why Brian and Mike and I worked out so great as a founding team, was that all three of us knew enough about each other's jobs that we could help each other out. But we were also complementary skill sets such that we could trust each other to own our respective pieces of the organization and excel at those areas.
Right.
So if it came to engineering things, I could debate stuff with Brian a little bit, but at the end of the day, I could be like, "You got this, man. You're the expert here. I'll stay out of it." Right? Like your call goes.
Got it. Okay, great. So I read an article that, you can tell me if this article is true or not, that Zapier is like giving people incentives and paying people to move out of San Francisco and to work somewhere else if they join your team. Can you talk about that? That sounds crazy.
Yeah, so this was one of our engineers' ideas. We had a few folks that were interviewing for Zapier who were living in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And they mentioned that one of the appeals for Zapier was that they could move back home if they got the gig. In fact, a couple people who did get hired moved to Florida and Pennsylvania, respectively.
Because you have a completely remote team. People can work wherever they want to, right?
Exactly. So one of the engineers thought, like, well, maybe we can tap into that. Maybe there's more people who are feeling similarly unhappy or not thrilled with kind of what's their current life situation in the Bay Area looks like.
Yeah.
And they came up with this idea like, well, relocation's a normal thing. Let's do the opposite. Let's call it delocation and move people away from the Bay Area. And so we came up with just like little experiment, like, hey, if you interview at Zapier and get a job and you're in the Bay Area, we'll give you $10,000 to reimburse you to move you anywhere else in the world if you want it. And so, we did that early last year, and the media just ate it up. The press loved it.
Got it. Were you building that primarily as something that you wanted to kind of get you more exposure in press, or are you building it because there was some sort of financial reason why people should not be in the Bay Area? Because it's expensive.
There wasn't a lot of like thought put into it, honestly. Like it was just like, this seems like a cool idea. Maybe we'll get some extra applicants from the Bay Area. I'm sure like, the Hacker News crowd will eat this thing up. Right. And so we were like, here's what we wrote up a little doc that's like, here's kind of the fine print of how it might work. And let's see what happens. And so we put it out there, and like the next week I was on like TV and stuff. It was insane. I love you guys' approach to like doing things out of the box of like the traditional, here's how you build the tech company box, right? Like just trying experiments like this, or like taking your money that you raise and putting it in a savings account. Like, I think that's so awesome. I love your approach to that. Yeah, it's I think that people there's a phrase that gets tossed around like first principles a lot, which kind of basically means deconstruct problems to its basics and then reconstruct them how you think solves the most direct problem. And I think that's kind of the way we like to think about any sort of situation, which is like, when it comes to an office, is like, well, why do people say you need an office to have a company? And we'd say like, well, why? Right. And just kind of keep deconstructing. Another way might be like the 5 whys, right? Just keep asking why until you really understand it. And then sometimes when these playbooks that have been built up over time, when you ask why enough, you realize, oh, this playbook is fundamentally broken in some way and doesn't apply anymore. And we can actually get the results that this playbook would give us in another way that's more effective. Now, sometimes you'll deconstruct it and realize, actually, this playbook is just fine. Like, we should keep doing that. Like, for example, we have a fairly traditional management hierarchy because we went through that analysis and realized, like, there's a reason this management stuff exists, and it's because it works. And there's tons of, like, behavioral research and, social sciences research that goes into how orgs work and all that sort of stuff. And turns out the management piece of it works pretty good. So like, we're going to be fairly traditional on that side of things.
Right. People will have bosses and all that kind of thing.
Exactly. Right.
Got it. Okay, great. So last question for you. At some point, I'm assuming you kind of made a transition from being a purely entrepreneur to being a CEO right? And those things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but your role is kind of changed. Talk to me about that moment where you kind of realized your role changing.
Yeah, I think you don't always realize it right away. It started probably happening around 20 to 25 people, and in a very small scale. I never would have, like, at the time, I would have still called myself, like, I'm a founder, like I'm a co-founder. Like I hesitate from using the CEO word a lot because it feels very heavy for that size of the company. But that's when, like, things start to change. You're not actually involved in every decision anymore. Work happens by a lot of other people and not you.
Right.
And you have to start trying to remove yourself from the, like, day-to-day execution of the company. It probably was around probably late 2016 or early 2017 when I realized, like, yeah, I am, like, the CEO now.
That's relatively recently.
So, yeah, and really, I think it's just part of, like, fully embracing it. And at times, like, even people on the team, like, will tell me, like, Wade, you got to step up and own the CEO. Like, folks on our executive team, like one of our three, they're like, step up and own it and really be the public facing thing. But that's a tough transition, I think, for a lot of founders who aren't, like, don't seek the limelight. We're in it to help our customers out. Yeah. And so to, like, embrace that public kind of role is a bit, it's, like, a bit nerve-wracking. And so it's taken me a while to get there, and I still struggle with it from time to time.
What's more public about the CEO versus the entrepreneur? Like, what actually changes in the role?
I think the biggest thing is that there is 100 people inside of Zapier now that look up to you as, like, the ultimate authority on the company. Yeah. And a lot of times you've hired smart people in your company that are a lot smarter about a lot of parts of it. So at any given time you're talking about a subject, there's probably at least one other person in the company that knows a lot more about the thing that you're talking about, because you probably hired smart people. And so that's what's a little nerve-wracking, is you're like, I'm not an authority on anything in the company. The only thing that I am is I have a high level vision of where we're going, and I know kind of how to put the pieces together, and I know how to get the right people to collaborate together. Like, that's what you really are bringing to the table. And so it is a bit nerve-wracking to just get up there and talk about all this stuff and realize, yeah, there's probably one or multiple people in the company that on this specific topic, they are a better qualified person to be talking about this thing. But people want to hear from the CEO.
Perfect. I love that. Okay, Wade, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and we will talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.
Mm-hmm.